Now I want to get right to the phone because we have Congressman Darrell Issa with the 49th Congressional District up in the North County here in San Diego County, who also happens to be chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Congressman, it's nice to have you here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me back, LaDonna. And it's still sinking in that Republicans were given an opportunity again to really go after waste in government, and I get to be at the center of it tonight with the president.
Well, you're taking a lot of heat for it, though. There's at least one group that's launched a website that's very critical of what you're doing in oversight and government reform, and they don't appear to they think it's pretty much a witch hunt.
You know, the amazing thing is, for the previous 2 years, I worked with Chairman Ed Towns, and what he got for trying to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, regardless of which administration was in power, is his party tried to primary him. He was pulled off of being the ranking member. It's not an easy time to go after waste in government because those sacred cows often are considered to be political cows. But when you've got $1.4 trillion worth of borrowed money just to pay the bills of government's excess, 40% of the total budget is now borrowed. The American people want us to get rid of every sacred cow immediately.
What do you expect to hear from the president tonight? What do you think is going to be his theme?
Well, I think one of his themes is going to be regulatory reform. We've been championing this. We've corresponded with companies and trade associations to try to get their priorities and insight into areas in which excess regulation or conflicting regulations are dampening the ability to create jobs here in America. And I think the president's gotten it and is getting on board. I'm going to listen carefully, though, LaDonna, because it seems like sometimes that regulatory reform turns into investments and investment turns to spending. So hopefully the president gets it, that the only win-win is when you spend less, regulate less, get a good enough or even sometimes better result, and more jobs are created.
The Wall Street Journal did an article yesterday, and it was an argument against what this new executive order really says. One of the things that it says is that agencies have to consider, and I'm quoting here, equity, human dignity, fairness, and distributive impacts and I don't even know what that means. Distributive impacts as benefits of regulation. So it seems like there's a lot of lip service being paid here, but not a lot of teeth in this.
Well, you're exactly right that this executive order is more than a little ambiguous. It certainly talks about self-inflicted wounds that the president says he's going to get rid of, and yet he sent less than a clear message. You know, we sent out letters, and within hours of people receiving them, they called up and said, how do I email back the answer? I don't want to wait for the mail. Here are the problems. When the president invited the president of Cisco and a lot of high-tech companies to the White House, he found out what he should have already known. There's $1.2 trillion worth of U.S. profits made overseas that is not being repatriated because of the current penalty. In California, 45% of it would be taken by the state and federal government. The answer there is fairly clear. What is it going to take to get over $1 trillion of capital that's sitting overseas back to America? Because it's going to invest overseas if it isn't brought back to America. These kind of questions and answers need the president to lay out tonight. I hear it, I get it, and we're going to act quickly. I haven't yet heard this, but at least he's beginning to realize that part of the problem is excess and conflicting regulations. It takes longer to do things in America, and I know I'm talking a long time, but, remember when the president said that he found out there was no such thing as a shovel-ready project?
Right.
Well, during WPA, during the Depression, when we had all these federal work programs, everything was shovel-ready practically the day after it was announced. We have lost that edge even when government tries to create temporary jobs, and that's what the president has to realize. The only jobs that can be created through this bureaucracy are private sector, and they need government off their back if they're going to do it faster.
Congressman Darrell Issa joining us live here on AM 600 KOGO from the 49th Congressional District up in the North County and chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. I wanted to ask you a little bit about health care reform because the Republicans, once they gained control of the House, they said that the first thing they were going after was the health care reform bill, that monstrosity currently sitting on top of this country. And when I had Bob Filner on, he said, if there's something that you don't like in it, why not take that out and leave the other parts of the bill? And I wonder if you wouldn't have had more cooperation with Democrats had you actually gone at it that way, because this thing is DOA in the Senate. It'll never make it past the Senate, and if it did, it would never make it past the president.
Our vote to repeal was more than symbolism. It was a way of saying, in no uncertain terms, the American people changed the majority in the House so we could change the direction of that and other bills. The health care reform bill, often called Obamacare, was passed on a purely partisan basis. The only negotiation was between Speaker Pelosi and a few blue dogs to try to make sure she got more of them on board. That was not bipartisan. We are certainly willing to do a very bipartisan reform. There are a number of issues we agree on that need to be tackled, but in many cases it would be tackled differently if they were bipartisan. And most importantly, Medicaid expansion to cover almost all the 30 million additional covered are being covered by one of the most wasteful and fraught with fraud programs in government. The fact is, Medicaid is not an efficient delivery system, and we have to get to that efficient delivery system. We already pay more from the federal and state governments for health care than Canada spends for all care. So we have an efficiency problem. We don't have a government spending problem.
Congressman, there will be not just one, but two responses to the President's State of the Union address tonight. The first by Republicans, and then the second by Michelle Bachmann, who is doing a separate response. Is her philosophy, is her belief system so separate from that of the mainstream Republicans that we are going to expect to hear something very different from her? And what do you think about her doing a separate response?
Well, I think if every member does a separate response in their home districts, their home states, that would be good. Certainly the conversation I'm having with you, I'll be having similar conversations afterwards. I think the important thing is the press picks who they want to highlight. If it's Michelle Bachmann, so be it, or if it's Sarah Palin or any number of other people. But the Republicans in the House picked John Boehner to be our leader. We were unanimous in that. We picked Eric Cantor to be the majority leader. We picked Kevin McCarthy to be the whip. And we will have picked one response in addition to every member making appropriate responses. And I think when the American people look and they say, what's the consensus of 308 million Americans on the Republican side, and what's the consensus on the Democratic side, what you have is you have Barack Obama versus the designate of the Republicans, and that is John Boehner or Paul Ryan in this case as the designee. And those who know Paul Ryan know he is without a doubt one of the smartest people ever to walk in or onto the House floor. And so he's an extremely good choice because he understands the budget. He understands where we can make changes that get America paying less and getting more.
Congressman, what can we expect to hear from Paul Ryan tonight?
Well, I think what you're going to hear is a down payment on what we're going to do through the budget process. You know, our Democratic colleagues didn't do a budget last Congress. The president didn't force that budget, so the budget process fell apart. As a result, there's no defining direction, so they simply kept punting spending. We've made a commitment to find a way to remove on an annual basis $100 billion without taking on security or entitlements as a down payment on what we will do over time to confront even harder issues, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and a growth in a lot of other areas, including even defense spending. I think you're going to hear Paul Ryan talk in terms of what we're going to do and what we then have to do. And hopefully this down payment gets more and more Democratic members to come to the table and say, you know, people in my district, even though they voted for me, they're asking me to work with you. That's our goal. We know that we only represent 1/3 of what it takes to pass a law, but we do represent the most current opinion of the American people, and we want to try to articulate it tonight and continue listening to it in the days to come.
Well, Congressman, I appreciate the time. That's Congressman Darrell Issa, who's with the 49th District up a little bit north in Vista, chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. We appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on.
Please do.